what I want to share with you is something that hasn't been in my possession for over 20 years. And that's my first rug. Now, typically it's not the first thing I hooked because I did 3 chair pads. But it is my first official rug. And I absolutely love it. And I was looking at it the other day and there's like, there's some pretty clever things that I did, even though I didn't know what I was doing at the time. And I wanted to share those with you because this is hooked 100% with recycled wool, and most of the wool is solid. And as you know, what I hook with now is mainly textures because quite frankly, I think it's easier to hook with textures than it is to hook with solids. But let's take a look at this and I'll talk about how you can make a solid a little more interesting. It's an oval rug. If you notice, the backing's a little bit floppy, and I'll talk about that. And it's got a dark background with a lot of mixtures, and I'll explain why I did that. And then we'll talk about some of the flowers. Okay, so that's what we're looking at. Okay, so the backing that this is on is a strange backing. This was actually a pattern that I bought at a garage sale for 25 cents. Yeah, good deal, right? And I think it was for rug punching or for yarn punching because it was, and I don't remember the name. I'm thinking it's Bucella, but I'm not 100% sure. But this was back in July of 2000 at the Village-wide garage sale. And I can even tell you the place where I actually bought it. It was one of those things that you remember for a long time, right? And I had done 3 little chair risers, and that was it. And this was the first rug pattern. And by then I had been recycling enough that I had a fair amount of stuff, not a huge amount, but I had a fair amount of stuff that I thought I could make it look interesting. Now, as you can see here, I didn't have enough black. And I always tell new rug hookers the best thing that can happen to you is that you don't have enough of one wool to do something. Because it's going to force you to do something else, and it's going to be better than if this had been an absolute solid background. Now, there is one trick that I employed. And do you notice that the background behind the flowers is a little bit quieter than it is out here? So I used mostly darks, although there's quite a few, there are some lighter grays. But I used mostly darks, and I didn't bring in any of these more interesting wools, which I wish I had a bunch more of this guy, right? Okay, so this is the one that I dole out very carefully just for monarch butterflies, because that looks like the dots on their body and on their wings. That makes the perfect monarch butterfly. Maybe someday, I guess if I get desperate, I could rip it out of here and replace it with something else. That might be one way to get around it. But I've used a bunch of different things and just sort of mixed them up. This is not my true jigsaw puzzle method. It was an earlier version. Remember, this was my first largest rug. But the spaces, I'm still using the same principles. I'm breaking things into smaller spaces and then hooking around and around inside the smaller spaces. And I think that gives you a prettier look than if you constantly go round and round and round and round the same thing, especially if you're using things that are quite different, because the lines of your hooking are going to show up even more, right? So if you have a background where there is a difference in value, like here, the direction that you hook becomes a lot more important. Okay. So let's talk about the flowers. And I think the one thing that I love the most about this rug is the white flowers. And I was playing around with how to hook them, and this one might have been the first one I hooked. And I started hooking them all white, and it was like, oh, that is boring. That doesn't look good. I don't like hooking it. I'm already bored. So then I went on and I came up with some other methods, and this one probably is the most evolved of all the methods. And what I was doing was lining them up in value order and then hooking them. So I would, oh, it's not real systematic. Not as systematic as I remember. But I would then just kind of use the different values going around the flower. I added the vein down the center. It probably wasn't drawn on the pattern because there's nothing on this one. So it probably wasn't there. It was probably something that I added to break it up. Whenever you've got a color that seems like it's just too big for the rug, and white and yellow can be that. They can be too big for the rug, meaning when you look at the rug, all you see is these huge white flowers and they're like a spotlight in your eyes and you can't see anything else. That's when you need to take that space and break it up. And that's what I did here. And I it looked like I just had a good old time playing with the different values and changing things around. And luckily got away from hooking, the petals completely solid. But I didn't rip them all out and make them all matchy. That I left in. I left in these two, actually three over here, for no rhyme or reason, just because it's there. Then what I did is on these little tiny 4-petal flowers, I hooked every petal different. Why? Because it could. Because it's too boring to hook them all the same. When you hook petals all the same, they tend to blend into each other and it looks more like a blob. So if you look at flowers and you're going, oh, it looks like a blob, I want you to hear in the back of your brain my voice saying, hook them in different wools, different colors, like this one's more red, this one's more orange, different values. This one's dark, this one's light. Just something different. This one's solid, these two look like textures. Okay? Mix them up. It will look right as long as they're on the same family. And that's one way of doing that. This one, it looks like I outlined it. Probably had planned on outlining everything with this wool. And then went, okay, I'm not real crazy about how that's looking. Let's make it look different. So I got a different outline. And sometimes what happens when you experiment, it's not that these were wrong, it's just that it needed the difference of the others. So a lot of times when you are filling something in and you go, oh, maybe I should use something else. Use something else. But then look at it when you're all done. Sometimes what's right is everything you've done. Okay? And it isn't just one thing or the other. This main flower in the center, this is one that I wish I almost want to rip it out and see what the pattern looks like underneath because I don't remember. But I used a lot of different colors and different shapes. Even the center is outlined in one yellow and then filled with another lighter yellow. And I've done that with almost all the centers. As you look around, even though they're small, it gives more interest and it tends to like turn things one way or the other. And that makes it a lot more interesting than if you simply outline with one thing and then fill it in with something else. So this is filled in with just a bunch of different stuff. It works because the value is right against the background. And I knew immediately that I was hooking on a dark background. And if I remember right, on this rug, I did hook the background right away. It was my first main rug, but it was like, I want to see what background looks like around my motif. I can't wait. So I would have to hook various little things that touch so I could get a little bit of background in. But what getting it background in early does is it confirms what is working in your rug. If you wait till the very end, you won't know. And you might rip something out that looks like a blue blob because it doesn't have the dark background around it. And once it has the dark background around it, you might like it so much better. What else is in here? I'm not even sure what this purple spray thing is. It makes me curious to wonder what maybe the shape looked like, but it looks like, based on the direction of the hooking, some of this is hooked as a petal, but it's much too dark for that background. So if I wanted this to show up completely, this area here and this area here, and even parts of this petal are so dark that they would probably have to come out. That's why it's important to choose your background right away, right? Because one rule, okay, that you should abide is that if you're using a super dark for your background, you can't use super dark for your motifs. If you're using a light, you can't use light for your motifs. If you're using a medium, you have to stay away from any other wool that is in that same value. And how do you know? You simply grab your cell phone and you take a simple picture. And that'll work. Now, one thing you might notice is I was doing a lot of experimenting on the leaves. I think all the leaves are hooked with a different wool. This wool here, see, that's not as successful because it's so dark. I left it. It's fine. We fuss over the simplest little things. This little flower, you really can't see some of those petals, but I know it's there. My eye kind of fills in the difference. And the fact that it kind of blends away and goes back into the background, I'm okay with that. It gets this flower a little bit more attention. Not every flower or every leaf can be the big hero. So they're all done with a wide variety of greens, all differently. Now, how did I get all these different colors? You certainly can't find, especially when I was hooking this, which would probably have been late July, which meant I had started hooking probably 2 weeks before I started this. And I didn't have that big of a stash. It grew as I hooked this because I made more wool. Now, what that means is that there are methods that you can use on your wool that involve just dish soap and vinegar. And you can evolve or change the wools so that they're quite different. One of my favorite ways is to marry wool. And you can actually put one wool, doesn't have to be a bunch, but you can put one wool into a pot. Let's say, for instance, I'm going to do a dark black. And I'm going to put a dark black in the pot. And it's going to be ripped into, let's say, 4 pieces. And it's in the pot and it's cooking. And I put lots of soap in it. Because soap tells the dye to go out of the wool. Now, part of how much you use is going to depend on the pH value of your water. I happen to know that mine is very alkaline. There's one little city just to the north of us called Lime City. Yes, we are sitting on limestone. So that means that our water is very alkaline. So then what I have to do is when I put soap in it, I don't need maybe as much as you would if your water is more neutral or even more acid. So when in doubt, use a bunch. I'm always asked, how much soap do you put in the pot? You put in so much soap that if it was your kids doing that to wash dishes, you would yell at them. Okay? So it's turn the bottle upside down and pour in the soap. You can use laundry soap. You can use dish soap. Just make sure that it does not say bleach anywhere on the label. Why? Because bleach actually dissolves wool. So we want anything with bleach in our laundry detergent or our dish soap if we're doing this method. But you could use either one. Then you cook it. And as you're cooking, that dye comes out. Now, here's where it gets clever. You're going to take, we put in 4 pieces of dark. Let's put in 4 pieces of light into a soaking container. And let's let those sit and get nice and wet while the dark ones are giving up their dye. Once it gets up to the point where you're like, yeah, I've got a nicely colored water. It looks like a, medium brew tea or a dark brew tea. Then what you do is you take out a piece of the dark and put it in a resting pan. And you put in one piece of the light. Cook it, cook it, cook it, cook it. Pick a set interval. What it is, I don't know, because it's going to depend on the butane on your, or the, what do they call those? The heat measurement on your burner. So your burner might be hotter than mine. You might have it turned up higher than I do. You're just going to have to kind of look at it. But when you think that, particularly that light one, is changing enough, then you're going to take another dark piece out and put another white piece in. And you're going to do that until all 4 dark ones are now over here in a resting pan and all your light ones are in the pan. Now, if the water is still dark and you like the colors you've got on the light, get them out of the pot and get them into the resting pan, right? Otherwise, let them cook. If the water's almost clear, then go ahead and put acid, which would be your vinegar, into the water. Cook it. Then add the darks back in because the vinegar will push the dye back in. And process that for 30 minutes. Once it's processed, turn the burner off, walk away, let it cool, preferably overnight. When you're done, wash and dry in your washer. And wash it with blue jeans, with towels, whatever. It doesn't really matter. That's how I would get some of these different, particularly these sort of paler ones, some of these different wools. And I know some of the grays were created that way. Some are as is textures. But some of the grays were created that way. I had some white skirts and I used them as source to go into the pot. And that's how I got the variation. You could do the same thing with, say, greens. And as the green is losing its dye, then you put the lighter colored ones in, and your lighter colored ones could be something that is, say, yellow or even a baby blue. It doesn't have to be a piece of natural. It can be just about anything. And you end up with a wide variety of colors that now you can use them on something wonderful like this and create all that interest in all that variation in color in your rug cooking. That's going to be the best way to do that. Now, if you liked these rug cooking tips, there's a lot more inside the rug cooking journey, which is a membership that you can join, or you can simply go watch these videos and get started with more free information. So I hope to see you there soon. That's it, everybody, on YouTube. I am going to continue with the Zoom call in Zoom